Hi class, my name is Kate Calburn and this is my persuasive video essay. So the policy I chose for this assignment is capital punishment in America. So capital punishment, or the death penalty, is a government-sanctioned practice where a person is put to death by the state for as punishment for the crime they committed. Crimes that are punishable by death are known as capital crimes, capital offenses, or capital felonies, and they vary depending on the jurisdiction, but they commonly include the most serious offenses, which are murder, mass murder, aggravated cases of rape, child sexual abuse, terrorism, treason, espionage, sedition, piracy, aircraft hijacking, drug trafficking and drug dealing, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide, and in some cases the most serious acts of recidivism, aggravated robbery, and kidnapping. So statistics. So worldwide, 56 countries still have capital punishment, and 106 countries have completely abolished it. In the United States, there are still 28 states that have the death penalty. Lethal injection is the most commonly used method in the United States. It's done by injecting one or more drugs into a person with the purpose of causing death. The drugs used are typically a barbiturate, paralytic, and potassium solution. Some states still authorize other methods, including electrocution, gas chamber, hanging, and firing squad. More than 8,500 people have been sentenced to death in the United States since the 1970s. New death sentences have remained near record lows since 2015, after having peaked at more than 300 per year in the mid-1990s. In 2018, there were 2,738 executions in the United States. In 2019, there were 2,656 executions. So, pro-death penalty arguments. So to sentence killers to less than death would fail to do justice, because the penalty, presumably a long period in prison or life without parole, would be grossly disproportionate to the heinousness of the crime. Capital punishment also can provide closure for victims' families. Investigations using a variety of samples and statistical methods consistently demonstrate a strong link between executions and reduced murder rates. In short, capital punishment does in fact save lives. The punishment of death is deserved because, as it said, the punishment should fit the crime. Anti-death penalty cost studies don't take into account the increase in the cost of life without parole cases if there is no death penalty. Defendants who are facing the death penalty often want to make a deal by pleading guilty to first-degree murder in exchange for a sentencing of life without parole. The existence of the death penalty leads to guilty pleas that save the money spent on trials and limit the opportunity for appeals. The race of defendants executed in the U.S. since 1976 is 56% white, 35% black, 7% Hispanic, and 2% other. Lastly, the pro-death penalty camp states that there is a very small chance of executing the wrong person, and that is balanced by the benefits to society of putting off other murders. Anti-death penalty arguments. A punishment that is administered in an arbitrary way, as in imposed for some individuals but not for others, with no valid justification for the difference. The death penalty is far more expensive than a system utilizing life without parole sentences as an alternative punishment. Some of the reasons for the high cost of the death penalty are longer trials and appeals required when a person's life is on the line, and the need for more lawyers and experts on both sides of the case. And there's also the relative rarity of executions. The death penalty affects only a tiny percentage of those who even commit murder. Its effect is very difficult to pinpoint, and the National Academy of Sciences has concluded that past studies have neither proven nor disproven that there is a deterrent effect. As federal courts began to more thoroughly review whether defendants were given the right to due process, errors in official misconduct began to regularly appear, requiring retrials. When defendants were now afforded more experienced counsel with fairly selected juries and were granted access to scientific testing, some were acquitted and released. Since 1973, 167 former death row prisoners have been exonerated from all charges and were set free. Another aspect to consider is that mental illness also affects defendants' decisions to represent themselves, their ability to work with counsel, and jury perceptions of their motives, and whether or not they truly pose a future danger to society if they were to be sentenced to life in prison. The death penalty has also long come under scrutiny for being racially biased. Earlier in the 20th century, when it was applied for the first crime of rape, 89% of the executions involved black defendants, mostly for the rape of a white woman. In current times, when executions have been carried out exclusively for murder, 75% of the cases involve the murder of white victims, even though blacks and whites are about equally likely to be victims of murder. A bias towards white victim cases has been found in almost all of the sophisticated studies exploring this area over many years. These studies typically control for other variables in the case studied, such as the number of victims or the brutality of the crime, and still found that defendants were more likely to be sentenced to death if they killed a white person. The Supreme Court has found racial discrimination in the selection of the jury in individual capital cases. And lastly, the final argument is that the death penalty goes against our most basic human rights, which is the right to life. So that is the conclusion of my persuasive video essay. Hope you enjoyed it, and good luck in the class. Thanks. Bye.